Today on Jay Sekulow Live, in a bizarre move, the judge in the Flynn case, federal judge, lawyers up. We'll talk about that on Jay Sekulow Live.
Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live.
He's wanting to play every position. He wants to play the defense attorney, the prosecutor. He wants to play the judge. He wants to bring in his own hearings here. You know, this is something that's very concerning. It's no shock to me that he finally had to go get his own outside counsel.
Phone lines are open for your questions right now. Call 1-800-684-3110.
Frankly, he needs to explain, and I think the Court of Appeals is saying this is something wrong here. We need to look at it. And DOJ has acted properly. This just happens all the time in cases. Why is he not doing this? I think he's trying to play politics here.
And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
Here is the order for those you watch on Facebook and Periscope. I'm holding it in my hands right now. It's the United States Court of Appeals, District of Columbia. And you'll see In re Michael Flynn. And this is the judge in the case, Judge Sullivan. We've talked about the bizarre actions of appointing, as he did a couple weeks ago, he appointed a retired judge to basically prosecute Michael Flynn because the Department of Justice said we don't believe this should go forward, that we were wrong. And in a big admission like that, to say that there was even no legitimate basis for their investigation. And we've talked about Peter Strzok, but this is all very new legal ground. Remember, the judge initially claimed that his authority was inherent. So it wasn't codified. It wasn't in the rules of criminal procedure. He actually took it and said, well, if I've got this power in civil actions, I can then take this kind of power into a criminal case. But there's a lot of constitutional rights that kick in when you're dealing with a criminal matter. We're going to take your phone calls on this, 1-800-684-3110. So you had, just for those of you who maybe just be joining us, and if you missed any of the broadcast last week, so you had a judge. The writ of Mandamus is granted by the circuit court, so the appeals court, and they tell the judge, you've got to tell us why you made the decision you did to appoint this outside counsel. What kind of conversation did you have with him? You're the judge in the case. Did you talk about, you instructed that retired judge to how they should carry out their actions. So now you have the judge has lawyered up on his own. And it's a very high-profile attorney in Washington, D.C., Beth Wilkinson. It does indicate to me, and this is not just speculation, this is folks who watch this closely, that this is not just about responding to a writ of mandamus, that there may be conflicts, there could be issues, and when there are conflicts, the judge is supposed to recuse. But that obviously, I'll go to Than Bennett, Washington, D.C. Than, maybe it's because of the news coverage focusing in on, reopening states and Memorial Day weekend gatherings and things like that, that this judge did not realize up until Friday afternoon how serious this was.
I think that's probably right, Jordan. I mean, we said on the broadcast last week how this granting of the writ of mandamus only happens in extraordinary circumstances, and the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals said that is certainly the case. This is an extraordinary situation. It looks like Judge Sullivan has overstepped his bounds. He's tried to be Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. Jordan, I think the judge probably does realize he's in hot water, but rather than backing down, he seems to be doubling down. It looks to me, Jordan, that he's trying to play judge, he's trying to play advocate, he's trying to play prosecutor, and now he realizes he is forced to play defendant because of the actions he took. Jordan, the hiring of this attorney, well known in the D.C. area, I think it's an acknowledgement on his part that he's in deep water.
So this is, again, when we come back, Andy Economou has been a U.S. attorney and a defense attorney. He's been on both sides of this. And I will tell you, folks, the people I've talked to, there are legal issues that judges sometimes face for wrongdoing, usually outside of court. And they would have an attorney and they may be, facing some kind of action. But in this matter, this is highly bizarre. This order, I mean, think about this. He's appointed now, he's got his own attorney. He's appointed a retired judge to put out the case about why Mike Flynn should be found guilty and why the Department of Justice is wrong in saying we were wrong. And this is taking on a whole life of its own. We're going to explain this to you when we come back with Andy Economou as well. 1-800-684-3110. If you have questions, get them in now. Give us a call, 1-800-684-3110. folks, this happened, again, Friday evening. And depending on what time you're watching the news, because so much of the coverage is focused on states reopening and how businesses respond and things to the COVID-19 issue. And depending on your state, but if you're watching the national news, that's the focus of the coverage. So this story popped up a little bit through the weekend and this morning, but we want to explain it for you, the significance here and how bizarre it is to have a judge in the case, in Ray Michael Flynn, appoint his own, he's now bringing in his own defense counsel and is putting in orders in the case to actually put that defense. I mean, look at this. Entry of appearance, and it's from the judge in the case now having a defense counsel. I want to go right to Andy Economou. Andy, you've been on both sides. You've been on the prosecution side as a former U.S. attorney. You've been on this as a defense counsel. Have you ever seen a judge in an actual trial appoint a defense counsel before?
No, Jordan. This is the most extraordinary move I have ever seen taken by a judge in all the years I have practiced. Here is a judge whose job is to rule on motions that are brought by the parties. He has now been directed by a superior tribunal, the D.C. Circuit, to explain the ruling that he entered, appointing this Judge Gleason and as in effect, special prosecutor. And now the D.C. Circuit has ordered him to respond. And what does he do? Instead of doing the deliberative process that a judge should do, that is to say, make a decision, as Sidney Powell said, get your law clerks, find out what your response to the D.C. Circuit is, he goes and hires his own lawyer who makes an appearance, and I looked at her entry of appearance, for the defendant appellee or one of the parties in the case. He's not a party to the case. He's the judge. He's not the plaintiff. He's not the defendant. He's not the appellant. He's not the appellee, the respondent, petitioner. He is the person who is the umpire who is supposed to make a ruling. And now he brings in a lawyer to advise him how he is to rule. If that's the case, then he ought to not be a judge.
Yeah, I mean, this is what is, and again, people that are watching the show, and people that are calling in, I know Brian on Facebook just wrote in, why would a judge need to lawyer up? It seems like he wouldn't need counsel to explain his ruling. I think that's an important point, Andy, because in this matter, this wasn't about, the court was just saying, explain your reasoning, not you're in some kind of legal jeopardy. Judges get overturned all the time. If you're a district court judge, you know that can happen. And they get told by the Court of Appeals, you've got to do this. Or we're going to send this back to you to do this because we think you were wrong on this part, or you didn't analyze this, didn't spend enough time on this. You need to go back, have the parties argue it. So that happens all the time at appellate level to go back to a judge. Now, the writ of mandamus, it was, again, everything has been kind of unique to this case, and it hasn't happened a lot before. There's not a lot of precedent. But the judge began this by claiming he had some inherent authority. This all started with a judge not just ruling on making a decision on whether he wanted to accept the DOJ motion or not, which he didn't have to do, but instead he set up this new process of appointing some outside counsel to come in and argue about why the Department of Justice is wrong.
Well, this is not anything that he is supposed to do. The Department of Justice has made a decision to stop the prosecution of General Flynn, file a motion to vacate the plea, and the judge's job is to rule either grant it or deny it. If you say you deny it, then sentence the man and let him go, and we take the next steps up the ladder of what an appellant would do in that case. But you don't go appointing judges to give you the side opposite to the Department of Justice's position, that is this former Judge Gleason, and you certainly don't go hire a lawyer to represent you in making a deliberative decision as to what you should do. I mean, has he done something here that we don't know about? Has he engaged in politics that he shouldn't have engaged in? Has he done something that is incorrect or wrong? Does he need to plead the Fifth Amendment? Does he need to take some constitutional privilege into consideration? That would be the reason to me why he would go and retain Beth Wilkinson or any lawyer to represent him. There's something that does not smell right here, Jordan.
Yeah. No, I mean, this attorney, and she's very high profile, Andy, in Washington, D.C. Both sides of the political aisle have utilized her before, but it matters when you're being accused of something serious, not usually in matters where if it was just about the writ of mandamus and why'd you make the decision you made and maybe you're wrong, I don't think you'd take this action. Would you go to an attorney like Beth Wilkinson?
No, I wouldn't go to any attorney. I would sit down and I would say, well, the D.C. Circuit has told me to explain myself. I better get a decision as to why I did what I did, if I can possibly do that. But I don't go to an outside lawyer and say, come in here in my courtroom and I got a case going here. And the D.C. Circuit has told me the appellate court above me has told me to do something. Now, give me some legal advice here as to what I'm supposed to do. You're the judge. You make the decision. You don't go hire lawyers to give you legal advice. That's why you've been there 25 years, appointed by President Clinton. You're supposed to know the law, and if not, you're supposed to go find it out by your law clerk or yourself. You're not supposed to go ask lawyers from outside to come in and advise you. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
Let's go to the phones. Jerry in Rhode Island on line 1. If you want to talk to us in there, 1-800-6843-110. Jerry, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. You're on the air.
Hello, team. To Mr. Economou's statement when he said the man shouldn't be a judge, at the very minimum, by his actions, has he not either severed himself from this case while he's got personal issues? This case does not travel through the court system. Is there a chief judge of the federal court of D.C. who managed the docket and says, you've just negated yourself out of this case while Judge Flynn waits for his case resolution?
So in a sense like that, again, judges have the power to remove themselves from a case on their own. No one looks at that as anything wrong. In fact, when judges do that, I think it shows you the strength of our legal system, that they may have an issue. They may not be able to be, they're not the right person. For whatever reason, they're not the right person, right human being. You have to realize they are humans to make these decisions. But I think, Andy, that it's a key point. To me, it just reeks of there's got to be something else here. You could come up with legal theories all you want and submit that to the Court of Appeals. If they don't like it, they can then go take their next steps. But this is not indicating I mean, if you had a judge of this matter, do you think that by next week we're in a very different situation here? I mean, I just feel like at some point the ball is dropping. Something is going to drop in this because this judge keeps doing things that are unprecedented, and he's already been asked to show cause for one of those actions. Now he's taking another unprecedented action.
Yeah, he's got 10 days from whenever the day that the D.C. Circuit entered an order to explain himself. Monday, is that it, of next week? Well, then that's when he's supposed to explain himself. So he's got that time to do that. But to the caller's question, yes, he could and perhaps should have at some point recused himself. But that's a decision that the judge makes. No chief judge or superior judge can tell him that. The D.C. Circuit may say, we're removing you from this case because of whatever reason, but usually it's the judge who makes the decision that for whatever reason, I cannot be fair and impartial and neutral, and I've got to recuse myself in this case, and that's what Judge Sullivan should have done. Instead, he takes this unprecedented, unheard of step of going and hiring a lawyer to advise him as to how he should respond to a superior tribunal. Crazy.
All right, folks, again, 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. Let me take Mary Ellen's call quickly because I think it kind of keys in on what we were talking about and also the dates. So the judge has until Monday, June 1st to basically have this submitted. Mary Ellen, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. You're on the air.
Oh, hello. Thank you for taking my call, and I appreciate all you all do. Now, he has the June 1st date, but then now with this new request, does the new request supersede that June 1st date? Is he still held to that, and can they drop this? Can they just throw out this second request?
So there's nothing in even the action he's took, which was unprecedented to have. He's hiring an outside counsel to come in, and that raises all these problems for a judge because they're not supposed to be talking about where they're going in a case with outside folks, with folks who are not part of the judicial branch of the United States government. So, Andy, he's still bound by that June 1st. That is when the Court of Appeals said you must respond. Now, the response could look very differently when you have a defense attorney. As you brought up, there are constitutional rights. He could, invoke, but there's certainly rights that, again, in the criminal setting, you can't use as a reason why, but in the civil setting is different. So if he starts claiming the Fifth in a civil action that arose out of this, you can take inferences from that.
Yes, and the inference is that you've done something wrong. The inference is adverse to you, but who knows what he's going to take.
Yeah.
The thing that needs to be emphasized is he's got a deadline date set for him by the D.C. Circuit, and that sticks unless his lawyer, Wilkinson, gets that extended for some reason.
All right, folks. Again, 1-800-684-3110 if you want to talk to us on air. 1-800-684-3110. Check out aclj.org as well. That's aclj.org. We'll be right back.
For 30 years, the American Center for Law and Justice has been dedicated to protecting your religious and constitutional freedoms. Because of you, we've seen great success in the courts and Congress concerning the issues that matter most to you and your families. ACLJ Chief Counsel Jay Sekulow.
Our decades-long commitment to the Constitution and the rule of law is at the center of everything we do. The bottom line, our work could not take place without your generous support.
It's a critical time for our nation and our world. With so many challenges facing our country, the work of the American Center for Law and Justice has never been more important. And during this time of uncertainty, there's no better way to support the ACLJ than through online giving.
We truly appreciate your financial support. Without it, it would be impossible to do our work here and around the globe. And the best way to support our work is to make your financial gifts online at aclj.org.
Donating online is safe and secure, and an online gift at aclj.org can be put to work immediately, enabling the ACLJ to continue the battle against abortion giant Planned Parenthood.
These are our young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this, are fighting for life at a whole new level to beat back the abortion juggernaut. We've got a whole group of young lawyers that are defending them.
To protect Christians facing persecution.
The level of persecution is on the rise. It's being reported more, we're seeing it, and we can see the imagery, we can see the brutality.
We're talking about situations where people are put in jail, threatened with death or life imprisonment, simply because of who they are and what they believe.
To stand up for our good friend Israel. To work to uncover the corrupt deep state in Washington, and so much more. Make a difference today. Support the work of the ACLJ online at aclj.org. Every dollar makes a difference. Give today online at aclj.org.
Welcome back to Jay Sekulow Live. This is Jordan Sekulow. We are taking your phone calls, 1-800-684-3110. And again, the federal judge in the Michael Flynn case, this is at the district court level, has now hired a high-profile D.C. defense attorney. And again, there are times, people will point out that, wow, this attorney, Brett Kavanaugh hired her because the accusations he was facing during his confirmation. Now, again, if you face accusations like that, that's serious, and it's outside what would be this case. That would be something you'd be dealing with on an individual matter that you have to still deal with. Whether you think it was wrong or right, politically motivated, believe whoever you want. This, again, you usually need to get attorneys in that matter when you're dealing with something that high profile. That makes sense to me. And again, you're being accused of something that would be criminal. In this matter, the judge, Andy, let's go back and just explain. The writ of mandamus action, which, again, it is fairly unprecedented to see granted in this matter, in a case like this. But because the judge took unprecedented action that was not based on anything that he could even point to in the criminal code for Washington, D.C., or for the federal courts or model or anything, he had to use civil procedures to bring in why he was doing what he did, and said he had some inherent authority then to take the action he did. It started raising these other matters that usually don't come up, but are kind of, again, you had that matter, and then a writ of mandamus gets ordered, and then late on Friday evening, we find out that this judge is lawyering up.
Yeah, the writ of mandamus is an order from the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals that was sought by Sidney Powell representing Michael Flynn that said to the judge, rule, that's what it says, rule on these motions and make a decision and do what you're supposed to do as a district judge. Instead of doing that, he goes and hires a lawyer to advise him as to what he ought to do in response to the second order issued by the D.C. Circuit, which was the order to explain yourself as to what you did in that earlier order. Now, it's like a judge who has been appointed, confirmed by the Senate, has a case before him or her. And in deciding what a motion should be in the case, how they should rule, they go outside and hire a lawyer and bring in a lawyer and say, well, I've been told by the upper court, the court above me, that I'm supposed to explain myself. To give me some legal advice here as to what I'm going to do. What do you need legal advice for? Have you done something wrong? Have you played politics? Have you injected a political aspect into this case that you should not have done? Should you have recused yourself? Are you in deep water with the appellate court? That's the kinds of things that I'm wondering that Judge Sullivan needs to be worried about, and that's why he has run to retain counsel. I don't have anybody retaining counsel problems with that, but a judge to retain counsel on how to rule in a case, that doesn't make any sense.
Take a listen to Doug Collins. He was on Fox News today talking about this.
He's wanting to play every position. He wants to play the defense attorney, the prosecutor. He wants to play the judge. He wants to bring in his own hearings here. This is something that's very concerning. It's no shock to me that he finally had to go get his own outside counsel, because he's just operating in areas right here that, frankly, he needs to explain. And I think the Court of Appeals is saying this is something wrong here. We need to look at it. And DOJ has acted properly. This just happens all the time in cases. Why is he not doing this? I think he's trying to play politics here.
I mean, that's the interesting point, Andy. I think Doug Collins, Congressman Collins, he keyed in on something important there. The one action that is not so outside the norm is that if the Department of Justice and the prosecutors at the trial court stage of a case, before, again, you've gotten through everything, said that they were wrong, that they even, regardless of testimony that was given, there was no basis for a legitimate investigation. So we are, as the prosecution, filing this again, they file and say, the judge can accept it or not. Annie, that was the key too. Judge Sullivan could have easily denied their request and their motion.
Oh, that's exactly right. Look, they filed a motion to allow Flynn to vacate his plea because the government, the Mueller squad, had violated the law in giving exonerative and exculpatory material to him and had tried to entrap him. So Attorney General Barr now looks at it and says, we should never have brought this case, and the man's plea should be allowed to be withdrawn as he has requested to be done in the case. Judge Sullivan, under Rule 28 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, we move that you withdraw. The defense agrees it's a miscarriage of justice if you don't. Instead, the judge, instead of ruling on the motion that's before him, goes and says, I'm going to get a special counsel, a judge, to argue against the Justice Department's position on this case, pursuant to what? Inherent authority. What are you talking about, inherent authority? Inherent authority from where? Just pulled out of the air? You can't do that. You got to have some law to support you.
I'm going to go back to Than in Washington, D.C. Than, to me, I mean, as we've talked to kind of these legal issues, but there's obviously in this matter, I mean, you're talking about a former national security advisor to the current president of the United States who is facing this kind of action, and it's been bizarre from the start. We've learned a lot about the investigation. It was bizarre, wrong from the start. So you have, and don't take our word for it, our opinion, the Department of Justice said they were wrong. That they were wrong, that they took the wrong action. They shouldn't have brought this prosecution. They had no legitimate basis for their investigation. And this kind of action, it should, even though it won't, it should chill both sides, Republicans and Democrats, to realize that this is wrong. And again, you do not want these kind of government entities playing politics. And that's what we saw from the start with Michael Flynn. He was being set up by Peter Strzok and Jim Comey.
Yeah, when you zoom out a little bit, Jordan, that really is the biggest takeaway for me, that from the very beginning of this investigation into General Flynn, there are example after example after example of federal officials overstepping the bounds that the Constitution and the laws of this land give them. And, I mean, Jordan, most of the abuses were in the Article 2 branch. You think back to the origins of this investigation, and you think about back-to-back days. You think about January 4th, 2017, when the Washington field office of the FBI recommended that Crossfire Razor, the look into General Flynn, be closed, and then Peter Strzok exceeded the authority that he had by overturning that decision and keeping the case open. Then you think about the very next day, Jordan, January 5th, 2017, that infamous White House meeting where both Barack Obama and Joe Biden were president, and James Comey is sort of identified as the one person who is going to translate into the next administration and might be able to keep tabs on General Flynn, even though, Jordan, in that very meeting, the memo from Susan Rice indicates that there has been no indication of wrongdoing by General Flynn. That is egregious overstepping by the Article 2 branch then, Jordan. And then just quickly, of course, the impeachment proceedings were the overstepping of the Article 1 branch. And now you have Judge Sullivan from the Article 3 branch trying to play the Article 2 role in making prosecutorial decisions. Jordan, I mean, just on and on and on, federal officials from every branch taking more power than they are entitled to.
All right, folks. We're going to start taking more of your calls when we come back. Second half hour, Jay Sekulow Live, 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. As always, go to ACLJ.org. Stay updated with the issues. And again, there's a lot of actions then between now and Monday. I mean, who could predict any of the actions going to happen next in this case? And that's why we're bringing in folks to analyze it for you, because it is unprecedented. Second half hour coming up next on Jay Sekulow Live.
We're in a fight for life that is incredible right now. Barbaric and horrific. This is the New York State's law on unrestricted abortion. No protection for the unborn child.
Not only did they pass it, they celebrated it.
Zero protection. Used to have personhood protection.
Right.
Now they don't.
That is now all completely repealed.
We've handled a series of cases involving those that are being persecuted for their faith. They called it terrorism, but they actually use in the indictment itself the word Christianization.
A principal comes and yanks your Bible away.
A teacher became aware that the student was reading from the Bible.
We're here standing for these kids and their families.
Prohibited from meeting with other Christians during recess.
We do have to fight against them when they occur. Otherwise, those abuses will win the day.
This is a fight that you're going to have to be engaged in. It's already a long-term struggle. It is not over.
We are so grateful to the people who prayed for us, and we are so grateful for ACLJ.
Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
All right, welcome back to Jay Sekulow Live. This is Jordan Sekulow. We are taking your phone calls, 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. And I'm going to go right to Than Bennett, Washington, D.C., because Than, oftentimes, you brought this up in our chat during that break we just had until our second half hour began, and that in Washington, you get these high-profile names that we talk about a lot and that kind of become the focus, whether it was Comey, McCabe, Peter Strzok, and you realize those folks had a lot of people working for them. And you bring up again an agent who you may believe, people might be talking right now in a way that they didn't until there were, whether it was inspector generals looking at it, whether it was the Department of Justice looking at it. There are a lot of folks who the paper would have passed in front of.
Absolutely, Jordan, and this really stems from the announcement from the Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham last week that he is issuing 53 subpoenas to individuals involved in the opening of Crossfire Hurricane, the FISA applications, and all the related matters, Jordan. And one of those individuals is FBI agent Joseph Pientka. A lot of people probably haven't heard of him, but he was the other agent that James Comey bragged about sending over along with Peter Strzok over to the White House to just see what they could get away with in talking to General Flynn. And after that meeting, Jordan, it was Agent Pientka that drafted the original 302. Then after that, infamously, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page had this back and forth about, editing the 302 to make it more favorable, but keeping Agent Pientka Pienka's voice. Now, Jordan, I don't know anything about that agent other than the fact that he had his work redone by Peter Strzok, who obviously had a bias. But assuming that Agent Pienka had a genuine motive, it was operating like most of the FBI agents and trying to do his job, Jordan, I would venture to guess that he probably wants his good name to be redeemed. So when he gets this subpoena from the Senate Judiciary Committee, this would be his opportunity to tell the truth, to be forthcoming, and to reveal what actually happened in that meeting and in the aftermath. So, Jordan, we surmised last week that maybe a lot of these people will take the fifth. I'm not so sure about this agent. I think he might be ready to tell what actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, he was involved at a level where, again, you say, like, if you can clear your good name, this would be the opportunity to do so. Peter Strzok's no longer your boss. They can't really, hold anything over you. Andrew McCabe is not there. Jim Comey's not there. And again, I think that's important. And it's a key. We've said from the beginning, this is a very long process to get to the truth. And because you're having to rely on courts, you've got a political process involved, subpoenas, and of course there's criminal allegations here, and then those are being a motion to quash those by the Department of Justice, who would prosecute them. I mean, again, there's a lot of moving parts, but we've said that from the beginning. And I think we've tried to take, as this develops, so that you understand the analysis, so that as it moves forward, you understand what's going on. Because it is a tough thing to keep track of if you're just watching the news, because the way the news will focus in on things like this, and then, if there's any kind of action, and then it kind of moves along. And right now, because there's other issues that are facing the country, you don't get the kind of, I don't think, the deep analysis that we're going into here. When we come back, we'll talk more with Andy. We'll answer more of your questions. 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. Is it a rogue judge? Is it a judge with a conflict? Is it a judge who's got something going on that, again, has led to now multiple acts of unprecedented action, let's just say. Unprecedented to see a judge appoint outside counsel in the case, criminal case. Unprecedented to see a judge, a writ of mandamus get issued on the judge's action that is supposed to respond to by a week from yesterday. So we're under a week. A lot of unprecedented action, or actually we don't see a lot. But again, we're talking about people's lives and livelihood. Criminal, being accused of a crime, and then the government coming and saying, who prosecutes that crime, saying we were wrong. There was no crime to even be investigated. There was no reasonable basis for our investigation, which is a pretty broad statement. And if there's no reasonable basis for even an investigation, there certainly wouldn't be a basis to bring criminal charges. We'll be back. All right, 1-800-684-3110. There's one line open right now. I'm going to start taking your phone calls now. We've got Andy Economou with us, former U.S. attorney. He's been on both sides of this. And again, I think it's important to point out people have a lot of legal experience, decades of legal experience, and never seeing anything like this before. This is not normal. This is not just getting attention because it's Mike Flynn, a former national security advisor. It would be something that, again, you would take note of as attorneys if it was happening in any case, in any matter. And this happens to be something very high profile, and the stakes are higher. And you have to wonder if this judge just didn't realize that. And I know for you that might be hard to imagine, but you do have to understand that these are senior judges in the federal court who are not used to getting the kind of attention at a district court level. Whether they get overturned or not by a court of appeals, that doesn't mean that they have, again, need a defense attorney. That's the interesting part about this, is that the Court of Appeals was just at what led you to think that you had this authority to appoint someone like a former retired judge to come in and basically prosecute Mike Flynn, when the prosecutors have filed a motion to say we were wrong. There was not even a basis for our investigation. Not even a legal basis for our investigation. Let me go right to the phones, 1-800-684-3110. I think this is a good question from Mary in Texas on line 4. Mary, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. You're on the air.
Hi, Jay. Thanks so much for all you do. My question, as I'm listening to you, is I was just wondering who would be picking up the tab for this judge's personally hired attorney.
Well, in this matter, I mean, Andy, this is the judge hired this person in his individual capacity, and he's marking himself down on the form that he filed in his own court system. I mean, he filed to the Court of Appeals, obviously, but he's a respondent now, so he's actually put himself in a position when he has to respond to the writ of mandamus, but for the legal term of art, he wasn't actually a respondent in the matter. I mean, Court of Appeals oftentimes send cases back to district court judges and say, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to let parties argue this, and then send your reasoning back on up, and we may take it, we may not. You don't have to have a defense counsel to help you answer that necessarily.
No, it happens all the time. Judges are often reversed, or the case is remanded, that is to say sent back for further elucidation of the judge as to why he did or what he did, or for hold more hearings. That doesn't mean you can go hire a judge, and certainly it shouldn't be at the government's expense. I mean, hiring a lawyer, I mean, this isn't at the government's expense. You don't need, if you think you need counsel, I can't believe that you do, but I mean, to answer the caller's question directly, that shouldn't be at the government's expense. That should be at Judge Sullivan's expense. Why? He doesn't need a lawyer to deliberate. He can just rule himself, and ought to. I'm sure he has. He has for 24 years. Suddenly he needs a lawyer to explain to him what he ought to do in responding to the D.C. Circuit. There's something here, Jordan, that doesn't smell right.
Shirley's got an interesting question on this in Tennessee Online, too. And we kind of touched on this. I know I was still on the air early last week and then the previous week about the timing because you don't know who is going to be in charge of the Department of Justice come January of next year. And again, Shirley, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. You're on the air.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. It's like some of the actions of this judge seem to be delaying tactics, because should a Democrat win in November, a different Department of Justice might decide to bring the charges back against Flynn. And would that be possible? Can they overrule this Department of Justice?
I mean, the timing, it's a long time. I mean, Andy, that's the first part. It would be a long time to delay. Now that you see how long these cases can take, obviously, with General Flynn, this has been going on since day one, basically, of the Trump administration. But this would be an awfully long time for a judge to delay when he's got now the Court of Appeals on his back. And that may be why maybe that's part of the reason, too, he's got this attorney, is if that was his mindset, that's wrong, too, Shirley. That would be wrong and actionable, potentially, putting the judge in potential legal jeopardy, even, if he was making decisions based off politics, Andy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you overstep your bounds and you violate someone's civil rights, you can't hide behind judicial immunity and say, and if it comes out that what you were trying to do was just drag this thing out so a new administration comes in and then revokes Attorney General Barr's decision not to prosecute, which, by the way, they could do if they wanted to, because you got, new priests, new theology. That could happen come January 20th of next year, depending upon what the election is. And if Judge Sullivan is part of the dragging out process, I'd be looking at that if I was Sidney Powell on behalf of Judge Flynn real hard.
It doesn't look like the Court of Appeals, though, Than, in Washington, D.C. is going to let him get away with that. But we know in Washington is often, though, when you look at a criminal case, you always should imagine would this happen if it was on the other foot, and it puts people in tough situations. But it's almost we're at a point in Washington that's this thinking just doesn't go there.
Yeah, we'd be looking at a very different dynamic, I guarantee it, Jordan. But look, I would tell this to the caller. It might be a long time to delay in General Flynn's case, but I'm one of those who thinks that there's going to be multiple cases coming out of John Durham's office. I think one of them is going to be against Jim Comey. I really do, Jordan. I've thought that for a while. I think the evidence is overwhelming, and I think there will be a case against him and many others in the future. Those cases will be relatively new, Jordan. So if there's a new administration, if there's a new attorney general, guess what? That Article 2 branch under a different president will have prosecutorial decision-making authority, and they may make different decisions. They likely would make different decisions in this case. It's not how it's supposed to work necessarily, Jordan. Justice is supposed to be blind. But if you don't want a different administration or a different attorney general making these prosecutorial decisions, that's going to be on the ballot in November, Jordan. It just is.
All right, let's go to Angela in Connecticut on line 5. Andy, I think this is a good question for you. Angela, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. You're on the air.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. My question has what this Judge Sullivan done unprecedented for any judge to, particularly on his level, to do?
Yeah, already what happened in this case was unprecedented, Andy. So this was unprecedented from the start when he, instead of just, again, ruling on the motion, that could be appealed to a court of appeals, and he could be overturned, and this matter could have still ended up, Michael Flynn could have seen justice, but he could make that decision on the motion. He didn't have to appoint a outside former retired judge. So from that there, right from the start, and Judge Sullivan couldn't point to any precedent for this. He had to go to civil rules of procedure to find anything similar.
That's exactly right, Jordan. He appealed to the local rules of the civil branch of the district court. But yes, there's two unprecedented things here that I see so far. One, that he appointed a judge to argue against the Department of Justice's motion, and two, that he hired his own lawyer to defend him or to speak for him when the Court of Appeals ordered him to explain himself. I have been practicing law for 45 years. I've never seen a judge hire a lawyer to help him make a ruling.
Never seen this before. So folks, just understand, this is not normal. And when you see the Department of Justice coming forward, we know from the beginning that this has stunk from the beginning. But now it's not just taking people, from outside the government's view of this, people inside the actual government entities themselves. But now you have, when you're supposed to have this separation, this confuses everything. When the judge is now saying he's a respondent to the writ of mandamus and he's got a lead counsel. I mean, it's bizarre to even say, to read out to you, and I'm looking at this, because the circuit court didn't say, we think you've done something where you're going to go to jail, or he's not being accused of something where he would, that the actions could be. He gets overturned. He's a district court judge. It happens all the time. And sometimes you have to go hear different parts of the case. And all he was asking this is to say, explain yourself. Explain your reasoning behind why you thought it was okay to put forward to appoint someone to prosecute Mike Flynn. Where do you get this? And really to take what he said, to say, go to that inherent authority and expand on it. And the Court of Appeals probably would have said wrong, right, and move forward. But there's got to be something else going on here with this judge. And to me, there's already so much going on with the FBI agents who were involved in starting this thing. Well, there was already, the issues, and now that some of them are getting subpoenas from the Senate Judiciary Committee and from Chairman Graham. But to me, so it all reeks of deep state action, and again, we're just high profile names who thought that they constantly are. They used to comment a lot. Now suddenly they're silent again. This to me, again, it has reeked from the beginning, but it's still shocking.
Jordan, I think it's the same actions from a different portion of the federal government. I mean, back the closing memo we talked about earlier found that there was, quote, no basis for an investigation, and, quote, the FBI is closing this investigation, and yet Peter Strzok and Jim Comey did the exact opposite. In this case, Judge Sullivan is told by the higher court, no, you are wrong, go reconsider this, do the right thing, and he ignores them. Jordan, it's the same action, it's just from a different seat.
All right, folks, 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. A lot of calls. We're going to answer all of those when we come back on Jay Sekulow Live.
For 30 years, the American Center for Law and Justice has been dedicated to protecting your religious and constitutional freedoms. Because of you, we've seen great success in the courts and Congress concerning the issues that matter most to you and your families. ACLJ Chief Counsel Jay Sekulow.
Our decades-long commitment to the Constitution and the rule of law is at the center of everything we do. The bottom line, our work could not take place without your generous support.
It's a critical time for our nation and our world. With so many challenges facing our country, the work of the American Center for Law and Justice has never been more important. And during this time of uncertainty, there's no better way to support the ACLJ than through online giving.
We truly appreciate your financial support. Without it, it would be impossible to do our work here and around the globe. And the best way to support our work is to make your financial gifts online at ACLJ.org.
Donating online is safe and secure, and an online gift at ACLJ.org can be put to work immediately, enabling the ACLJ to continue the battle against abortion giant Planned Parenthood.
These are our young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this, are fighting for life at a whole new level to beat back the abortion juggernaut. We've got a whole group of young lawyers that are defending them.
To protect Christians facing persecution.
The level of persecution is on the rise. It's being reported more, we're seeing it, and we can see the imagery, we can see the brutality.
We're talking about situations where people are put in jail, threatened with death or life imprisonment, simply because of who they are and what they believe.
To stand up for our good friend Israel. To work to uncover the corrupt deep state in Washington, and so much more. Make a difference today. Support the work of the ACLJ online at ACLJ.org. Every dollar makes a difference. Give today online at ACLJ.org.
All right, welcome back to Jay Sekulow Live. The final segment today, we're going to start taking more of the phone calls. Great questions come in for folks. And this is why I wanted to give people the opportunity to kind of let this sink in and hear the analysis. Because what I would see on TV is you might get like 3 minutes here in this 1 hour, maybe a 5-minute segment, another hour. And so if you weren't watching then, this might not break through the COVID-19 into a full analysis. And so I wanted to do that for you today as we continue, again, to see just unprecedented actions. I mean, it was bizarre to see the news that the judge had hired someone so high profile, and usually when you're being accused of something, some kind of crime, and to bring them in to, I guess, respond for him and to file an action in a case like this while he's still the sitting judge in the criminal case. Let's go right to the phones. Alice in Washington State on line 6. Alice, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. You're on the air.
Thank you for taking my call. My question is, what has happened to our three branches of the government? We have executive, legislative, and judicial, and it just seems like the lines are no longer delineated. We've got governors making laws. We've got this judge deciding, laws. I mean, that's his job, is to rule on the laws, but actually making laws. I'm concerned. What can we do to get back to our Constitution?
Well, I do think, Andy, again, we always say elections have consequences. These judges do get appointed. They're appointed a lifetime, but the president gets to make those appointments when there are vacancies. And so, again, this is a appointee from President Clinton. So he's been on the court a long time at the trial court level, where, again, when it's a criminal matter, you think that even if there was politics at play in any of these judges' minds, like on issues like that involve abortion and issues like that, then when it comes to actual criminal case against any American, that they should all be treated the same way by the judge.
Yeah, Jordan, to answer the caller's question directly, the thing is to elect a president who will appoint a judge who will follow what an Article III judge is going to do. That is not being a legislator. That is not making a prosecutorial decision, which is the executive branch's decision to make. It is ruling on motions before you, and if you're reversed, you're reversed, and you do what the appellate court tells you to do if they tell you to explain yourself, and you don't go out hiring a lawyer. So the remedy here is electing a president who will appoint judges who follow the Constitution and understand the distinction between the three branches of government. Judge Sullivan might want to be U.S. attorney, might want to be attorney general, and he might be great at both of those, but he's not. Those positions are already filled. He needs to stick to being a district judge and ruling on motions.
Let's go to Gloria in Maryland on line 3. Gloria, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. You're on the air.
Thanks, Jordan, for taking my call. As I understand it from listening to your program, once the writ of Mandamus was sent to the three-judge court, they could have ruled against Flynn, and then his attorney would have had an option to take it to the Supreme Court. I understand they also could have just ruled the judge was wrong, that's the end of it. So my question is, why are they inviting him to give them an explanation? It just seems to me that it's prolonging the situation.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's pretty quick for court action that you get this, and within 10 days, including a holiday, federal holiday, yesterday with Memorial Day, and in the midst of COVID-19 and all the things that everybody's facing, operating and trying to get back to fully operational, is, Andy, that is the writ of mandamus itself is a writ to require some kind of response from the judge. So that would be this would be if there was normal to say it's normal. It's not normal to have this kind of, but the normal would be that it's to show cause.
Yeah, I mean, it's telling the judge, we order you to do something. And I think the reason they did that, instead of just reversing him, which they could have done and ordered him to enter the plea, rather to withdraw the plea and vacate it, is they were giving him an opportunity to save face. And they said to him, explain yourself. Instead, he goes off on a limb and hires a Washington lawyer to advise him on the deliberative process that he engaged into in making his ruling. That's wrong. That's not what he's supposed to do. Judges rule on motions before him. If it was a child custody case, does the father or the mother get the child and you're before the judge doesn't go and say, I think I need to go hire me a lawyer to give me some advice on how I rule on this. That's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to rule.
Let's go to Scott in South Carolina on line 4. Hey, Scott, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Hey, guys, thank you. Quick question. Why can't our great president fire Judge Sullivan similarly to the way President Clinton fired, 51 federal judges?
No, you cannot fire again. So federal judges, once they are appointed, you get to appoint them when there are vacancies as president. The Senate has to go through the confirmation process. Usually, these would not be names you usually heard of. If you even pay attention to the courts, you maybe focus on Supreme Court justices, and that's about it name-wise. But in the legal world, of course, these district court judges play an extremely important role because they put together the record for the entire case, even though there's an appellate process. But this is important, Than, because it speaks to the political ramifications of all of this, is that you get to appoint when there's vacancies, and there almost always are in the district court level, court of appeals level. But you do not get to then step in as the executive branch, because we're supposed to have the separation of powers and step on judges whether you like their decisions or not.
These are all very careful balances between the articles, Jordan. I mean, there's a reason that the Article 3 branch wasn't given prosecutorial authority. It's because they're the least accountable to the voters. It wasn't just an accident. There's also a reason that the head of the Article 2 branch, the president, can't just fire a judge, because you want them to have independence. That's why there would be an impeachment proceeding, which would bring in the third branch. So you see, Jordan, I mean, you know this well, but just to the caller's point, there's a very delicate balance here, and that's what makes Judge Sullivan's actions in this case, in my view, Jordan, so egregious, because they don't just impact General Flynn. They threaten the very delicate balance. And to Andy's point about them offering him a face-saving measure, I think that's exactly what they did. They showed restraint when he did not. But Jordan, it's only face-saving if he keeps it. At this point, it doesn't look like he's taking them up on that opportunity.
Whitney in Texas on Live 5. Whitney, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Thanks so much, Jordan. As an arbiter, Judge Sullivan seems so clearly biased against General Flynn. Mm-hmm. I was wondering, based on past comments and, of course, now his actions, can he be compelled to recuse himself?
So that would not be a recusal at that point, Andy. This, again, it gets into bizarre territory. Almost you'd have to find that the judge did something illegal for that kind of act. So it wouldn't be a recusal anymore.
It wouldn't. I mean, you would have to find that he overstepped his bounds for political reasons and did something that was horrible, which who knows what may be uncovered by the facts. But recusal is what a judge should do when he or she has gotten so personally interested in the case that they can't be a neutral arbiter. And I think Judge Sullivan probably should have recused himself early on.
All right, folks, that'll do it for us today on Jay Sekulow Live. We're watching this very closely. I said this. I did an interview for CBN News before our radio broadcast today, and I said, I don't think next week we're going to have the same. I think things will change again. I think there's a lot of moving parts, and that's just because his response is due Monday. So this could all be changing tomorrow. Stay with us throughout the week. on Jay Sekulow Live. And go to aclj.org as well. Stay updated with all the work that we're doing. Again, aclj.org. We'll talk to you tomorrow.